can give us a first short impression. What's your involvement with IFRS 17 and your current understanding of the status and problems? John, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a specialist and mainly in machine learning, so which is providing, obviously, utilizing the granular data and how to optimize it. So one of my focus is the reserving aspect of it and how we can optimize that. And I've presented both at the Institute of Actuaries at Berlin ICA 2018 Society of Ireland on, using machine learning at a granular level does add value on your actuals and your expected calculations, estimates. So therefore, you got the best of where you can make your risk assumptions both at a granular as well as a aggregate level basis as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, as you might have noticed, I'm a prudential regulator. The Prudential Regulation Authority is more concerned with the safety and soundness of insurance companies and banks. So I'm the Chief Actuary for General Insurance at the PRA. The IFRS 17 is not one of our standards, but we are aware that it is a challenge and potentially a transformational challenge for firms. Our interest in it is around, I'm trying to put this the right way around, shall we say the distraction potential of IFRS 17. We've already had Solvency II, which was it's been in place now for coming up for kind of 3 years, and we know that that was a big challenge for insurance companies, and in many ways was a distraction when there was enough to be getting on with anyway. IFRS 17 is similarly challenging in many ways, could be even more transformational in terms of kind of finance and actuarial functions. So we are interested in that from a distraction, a kind of management challenge perspective, and also, which I think is a topic for this morning's discussion, around decision making as well. And do we think that the standards which are coming in for entirely appropriate reasons around comparability and transparency, are they actually going to drive decision making in a way that is of potential concern to us as prudential regulators? So that's our interest in the topic.
Thanks.
And so from my side, I'm trying to implement IFRS 17, and speaking as industry, we wholly support the objectives. I think the insurance industry has suffered too long from being a bit different and a bit unique, and so we, absolutely behind the objectives. I think the concern is the standard actually meeting those objectives? It's unusual in the development process that the ISB don't do any field testing along the way. So it's very different from Solvency II, where we have the whole series of quizzes. So we were able to test and refine and ultimately know what the impact was going to be. The only field testing that has happened, proper field testing, was led by IFRAG as part of the European endorsement process, and that has thrown up quite a number of issues. Some new issues, some issues where we kind of thought, well, that's, we don't like that, and that's potentially a problem, but we didn't have an idea of the scale of the problem, and confirmed other things that we know were to be an issue. So I think it's, but I think that the problem remains that the ISB don't have any mechanism for actually really looking in detail at those field testing results. And I suppose sitting, as someone who's spent a lot of time and energy in restating a lot of numbers to be submitted to IFRAG, then the ISB say, well, we haven't got, we've heard this before, or, we need facts and circumstances, but there's no mechanism in place to properly share that data. So I think that feels frustrating, speaking from industry. And I think the overriding concern is, it is a very complex standard. It's requiring a huge amount of effort to implement it. And is it going to actually meet the objectives of making our report and accounts easier to understand and a better basis for communicating our results to the market? And there's certain areas where we've got some significant concerns still. But
if I talk about judgment on the one hand, and then I hear about your topic of machine learning.
Yes.
Do you think that this is a dimension or techniques that could help to reduce the individual adjustment and just make data more comparable, or at least make it different if they are different and similar, if they are really similar regarding the context and related risk?
Yeah, I think obviously when you use machine learning at a more granular level, it will provide some underlying assumptions which will implicitly help aid your decision making within your processes, especially the risk adjusted stuff. So at the moment, a lot of it is aggregated, calculated. So therefore, if you go more granular with that, it will create a different type of behavior function, as they mentioned about behavior. So both from a risk characteristic point of view, but also a risk behavior, which could also tell you a different insight around that as well. So I think that's quite important now to think about now. It doesn't mean having granular data that you always use the granular assumptions, but at least you can understand at a more of a, for example, a claim label, it will tell you whether it's a positive or negative. And then it allows you to make a better judgment on the blend of both aggregation as well as granular levels.
Okay. Another dimension of decision making, the internal decision, which parameters I choose, the decisions of investors who are looking for information. That's one dimension. I'm not sure, we've seen this a lot within IFRS 9 for the banking industry, that there was a huge discussion ongoing if this standard will change the terms and typical terms of products, like the maturity of a product, as different product features, will I rather separate different components. Do you see right now a discussion going on the product types, on the product preferences going on already for the insurance industry? Do you expect something like this?
Shall I pitch in with something first on that? So a kind of message that we are very much focused on in the context of general insurance firms is the challenges businesses are facing with quite a soft market, quite a kind of surplus of capacity, quite a lot of competition. We've seen some very significant catastrophic events. So having a discussion about which parts of kind of lines of business or even within an individual portfolio, having a discussion about what's actually making money, what's onerous, that is going in the right direction from our perspective. Whether we'd necessarily say an IFRS 17 is the right metric through which to kind of look at that question about, okay, what contracts are costing you, which contracts are making you money, it's certainly going in the right direction, and we're keen to see that there are kind of metrics. Yeah. And I think that the kind of aggregation of data and not looking into the individual elements within that is potentially a kind of lost opportunity, a missed opportunity. And therefore having these discussions which are motivated by the economics, motivated by kind of our concern about potential risk, that to our minds is going in the right direction, accepting that market forces are very powerful and that nobody can just unilaterally decide to change the nature of that market. So we think it's going in the right direction. Perhaps going back to the point about the kind of granularity and the sheer scale of it. I'm speaking to actuaries within general insurance firms, and they're having to deal with a level of detail, granularity that they're just not used to, and that's not just creating questions of more work. It's also creating challenges around systems, and we are seeing a lot of businesses saying, well, we need to invest now in transformation, thinking about kind of financial transformation projects, and how do we manage all these different groups of kind of business in order that we can track, answer those questions. And then kind of the treatment within IFRS is often about then saying, okay, that's in a box, that's a set of assumptions, you've got to run that forward for reporting purposes, so the complexity just adds to it. So the kind of economic reality can perhaps get lost, because you're having to just deploy this very, very complex decision-making reporting structure.
From my side, I think one of the benefits of IFRS 17 is the fact that we have got, it is helpful to have consistency, and I think it has been a catalyst for insurers to invest and more in data and aligning systems and so on. I think we're seeing quite a lot of that across the market. And I think there's been an element of insurers holding back from doing that because we've known for so long that IFRS 17 was coming. Having said that, there is, it is pretty onerous, the level of granularity that's required and the reporting, and I think, it's, and there's a lot of judgments involved in terms of, when you think something's onerous or not. Overall, is it going to change the sorts of products that we write? I don't really think it will. I mean, typically the insurers, general insurance, it's reasonably kind of straightforward product that people just need. I think you might see some, depending on where the ISB get to on reinsurance, I think you might see some renegotiation of treaties and so on to try to avoid some of the the practical issues that are just tripping up and making it difficult for people. But it depends how much the ISB is prepared to solve. And I think on the life side, that the life products, they tend to fill that gap where people want kind of some savings and protections and some certainty, and they tend to have grown up around tax structures and legal structures and regulation in different countries, and so I don't really see any change there. I think where the granularity of data is most difficult is in participating funds, is in with profits funds in the UK and across continental Europe, where there's a lot of mutual funds and there is the sharing of profits across generations of policyholders. That offers some protection and smoothing of returns, which is why customers choose to invest in those kind of products, and trying to split that up into annual cohorts is challenging.
I mean, from my perspective, one of the benefits for IFRS 17, talking about data and granularity, is thinking it gives us the opportunity to look at how do we have our current data within our company organisation. Should we centralise a data hub where it can help all the operational functions? That's one part. The other part is, as you know about, obviously, data science, machine learning, it's rapidly changing a lot. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of do in parallel, use these techniques with the data. So that would be really important in that perspective as well.
So you're saying that IFRS 17 is also facilitating a better understanding of your risk, of your data related to the contracts?
It's a trigger. So it's a trigger for an opportunity now and start thinking. So if we look at, for example, personal lines versus London market, data is really different shapes and sizes. Shouldn't we now look at the IFRS 17 as a trigger opportunity to have a more uniform data structure? Therefore, it will aid more better and provide more insight, not just from a risk point, but also from a behaviour point.
I think from our perspective, one of the things that concerns us is that as you say, general insurance can be quite simple. You're insuring a property. Is there a building? Yeah, there's a building. Is it damaged? Yeah. Is there a loss? This kind of thing. In property, in many ways, a lot of the questions around exposure and loss modelling have been addressed to quite a satisfactory or encouraging level. Less so on the sort of casualty liability side. And there we recognise that the businesses are often only able to answer questions about exposure, perhaps even a retrospective view of risk after the event. And therefore we're interested in businesses looking at data management and that whole question around exposure management and saying, well, what contracts am I writing? What's the potential exposure? What areas and how might that influence kind of losses? So on the exposure management side, saying, if you can curate, look after, manage the quality of, invest in the data that you've got, it can be used by the various groups, whether that's on pricing, exposure management, whether it's on actuarial, whether it's on finance, whether it's around capital reserving and actually take a sort of enterprise view of how is the data being looked after and how can we manage it.
So from a regulator side, do you see also the risks that the better understanding of the risks of the insurance contracts could backfire in the situation where you say, okay, insurance companies believe that they better understand their insurance contracts, better understand their risks, increase their overall risk position compared to a usually prudent view, and so this advanced data increases the overall risk and risk behavior in the industry?
That's an interesting question. Our experience to date, and I would point to the UK's experience with Flood Re, where you had digital terrain maps and a much more granular understanding of flood risk, that actually became a question of insurance companies avoiding risk, and actually we're going for more benign portfolios. So it's almost gone the other way. As you've sort of a fragmentation of risk, you've then got the question of availability and affordability of cover for certain kind of parties. I don't know if IFRS 17 is necessarily going to drive that fragmentation and question about availability and affordability. But yes, there's always shall we call a danger as you look in more detail at risk that you can identify. Oh, that's not a risk, that's a dead cert.
And Joe, you mentioned the invest which is done due to IFRS 17 in the infrastructure and the processes and so on. I'm pretty sure that's true for almost every insurance company, that there's a major invest on this side. On the other hand, do you see other decisions, other investments which are postponed due to the insecurity which goes along with IFRS 17?
Certainly managing through the uncertainty over timing of IFRS 17, and indeed the fact that we believe some changes need to be made, and there's also areas of interpretation which aren't landed, which would have a systems impact. So it is challenging to manage through that uncertainty in the implementation programme. Although I would say there's plenty to be getting on with, where we know what's required and expected. So that is our kind of approach to keep going on the kind of the no regrets activity, the stuff that is pretty clear, and there's that's most of it. And then there's probably kind of 20% that's of difficult stuff where either there is still different views amongst the big firms about how the standard's being interpreted, or there's areas where we're thinking, well, that just really doesn't work, and so we wouldn't want to build or lock us into that approach until we hear from the ISB in terms of how they're going to tackle it.
Yeah. If I come back to the example of IFRS 9 and the banking industry, the standard was also postponed at a later phase. First they started with a phase 1, and most financial companies, most banks started with the projects and stopped them, postponed them, and got serious losses and depreciation of their investments into the IT and the project implementation. So of course the industry asks for changes in the standard, but there's also a risk that I will have to depreciate my current investments. Regarding the changes, there's one question. Do you think that the ISB are listening enough to the industry's concerns about IFRS 17? So that's of course the question to you.
I think the answer is not really. I think they've had. I think what's disappointing is that they're not really looking into the field testing results. So on one level, they're listening in the sense that they have deferred the standard, and I think they understand the implementation challenges and they understand there are issues. But I don't feel they are really looking into what's giving rise to those problems. It feels like they feel like they've heard it all before. That's they keep saying it's nothing new. We've heard it all before, but I can honestly say that we've learned a lot in doing the field testing, and there are results there, things that we didn't expect, or we didn't expect it to be the scale of the issue. So I think it's disappointing that the ISB is not willing to take just a little bit more time and really look into the results of the field testing.
Okay.
I mean, I think they're likely to fix a limited number of issues, but I think their focus is more on timing than getting the standard right, and IFRS 9 is a key driver for that. Although I think insurers generally, pretty much all insurers have their assets at fair value. And now a lot of continental Europe is fair value through OCI, so they're not showing it in the P&L, but it's at fair value. And all of the UK largely is on a fair value through P&L. So the concerns around IFRS 9 for the insurance industry are not the same as it was in the banking industry.
And question to all three of you, or especially maybe James too. If we talk about the results from IFRS 17 from an external perspective, from a user's perspective, analyst perspective, you mentioned IFRS 9 and the possible mismatch between the insurance liabilities on the one hand, the assets on the other hand. How important is it to receive a match? Wouldn't it be possible to explain differences to external parties, to the regulator, to an analyst, just by the systematic way how the standards work together?
Yeah, I'm not close enough to IFRS 9. I mean, I've observed it from a distance, and that it was a new and interesting challenge for the banks as they actually started to provision for, kind of credit losses. And whether that, created the discipline that was anticipated, one would like to think that it did. I think, to answer your question about explaining, I think that is very much. These are horribly complex standards. Solvency 2 is horribly complex. IFRS 17 is horribly complex. They are, as you look at them from a distance, they're quite similar. As you move towards them, they're totally different. And therefore, a challenge for firms is they're given these different lenses through which to explain and look at their businesses, explain the value creation within their business, the risk within their business, is to actually then provide a commentary. And where we challenge boards as the kind of key decision kind of groups within the governance of a business to say, are you understanding the differences here? Are you understanding what insights it's providing on risk, value creation, and the rest of it? And then I think it's kind of beholden on them to then similarly rise to that challenge and say, we see these differences, we need to explain this to you. Now, it's not that it needs to be a 30-page report, it can just be a commentary around, here are the fundamental differences between these different metrics and perhaps these standards, because the experts are the people who are actually making the decisions and developing the numbers within the business.
I can give you an example. I mean, it's not differences between IFRS 17 and IFRS 9 that we're concerned about. It's things within IFRS 17 that are creating a mismatch. And there's within IFRS 17 there's three different measurement models. If you're in the general measurement model, which most of the UK is, you've got to lock in the discount rate for the CSM, which is the profit margin. The rest of the liability is not locked, and then when you change operating assumptions and update your best estimate, what everyone is expecting is that IFRS 17 is going to give you a nice smooth answer, and that difference is going to be spread forward over the remaining life. But what actually happens, because of the differential in the discount rates between the profit and the best estimate, you're changing your profit margin by a different number than you're changing your best estimate, and the difference goes to the P&L in the year. So you get this, large number, which depends on the differential in the interest rates, not on whether you've done a reserve strengthening or a reserve weakening, and we're faced with, to try to explain that whenever, continental Europe is all largely on the variable fee approach model, and all components of the liability are, the discount rate is unlocked. So you're trying to explain, a large number in your P&L, which could be a positive or a negative, and it's because you've measured two different components of the liability at a different discount rate, and it's relating to a demographic assumption change. And so to try to explain that to your average buy-side analyst, who wants to know how much, what's the profitability in the year, that they're not going to take the time to actually to work through all that. So it's that kind of level of complexity which we're faced with. And how can the only way we can really explain it is this big number in the P&L you need to ignore, because it's down to a difference in how we measure two different components of the liability on a balance sheet, and it's got nothing to do with cash, economics, or performance. But how is that helping us tell our story?
Thank you. There are some questions coming in. I think one is directly addressed to you. Do regulators have any plans to issue guidance to firms on IFRS 17 implementation, and do they plan to conduct any form of review of the implementation?
What was that last bit, form of?
Do you plan any review of the implementation?
I think the short answer to that is no on both of those. It's a reporting standard. That's for other bodies to determine those standards, and there are existing sort of structures, various kind of working parties and implementation groups who will work on that. Institute Faculty of Actuaries have been looking at some of the questions around IFRS 17. We need to be very careful as a regulator about providing guidance, and in many ways say, well, the rules are the rules, and this is not our standard. As to the sort of implementation piece, I think I'd kind of say, going back to the original question about, is this going to be a distraction? We could be asking similar questions of firms, if they were looking at, say, a significant acquisition, or they were looking at a significant change of platform for systems, and basically saying, have you thought through the risks of this? So we might speak to them about how they've gone about that, and perhaps the risk of kind of misstatement and then going back with that. But that would be within the kind of general bucket of kind of operational things that can go wrong, because I go back to it, it's not a prudential standard, it's a reporting standard. Hopefully that's clear.
Yes, that's helpful. I think this is also a question somewhere coming from the relation to the banking industry, where the regulator actually issued the interpretation and implementation requirements guidance for some parts of the standards regarding credit risk.
Yeah.
So
I'm
not sure from whom the
we have no plans.
Okay. How should insurers best use the year's grace given by the IASB? What are the most important topics you should do within this time you probably get additionally? John, do you have any ideas on this for the implementation?
I think for the implementation, we need to think about what systems we're using now, and on the back of that, look at the processes as well, how we currently do it and how we should be doing it. Systems could be, obviously, you can get off-the-shelf systems, or you can create some bespoke, but there is a trade-off having bespoke versus off-the-shelf system. So it's about doing sort of like a cost benefit around that as well, and just understanding what is important now to your short, medium and long term, and how is that correlated with to the IFRS 17 requirements as well. That's from my view.
Okay. Regarding the systems, of course it's always a decision make or buy a toolbox and customize it. What do you assume is the usual industry standard, or is there a usual industry standard?
I think across the market, most people, vast majority, seem to be wanting to buy a solution. what I think has been challenging is you need a solution that will fit into your existing IT architecture. You need something that will pick up information from your actuarial models and lots of granular policyholder data, to put that into a calculation tool which will give you which will calculate your CSM and give you all the disclosures and analysis of change that you need. Those calculations are themselves not difficult, but it is a huge amount of data and quite a lot of rules that you need to go into that engine, and then you need it to come out the other side and plug into your general ledgers and give you all those kind of postings. So I think that is what is the most challenging, because it's how this tool lines up with the rest of your IT architecture, because people have got actuarial models on different platforms and they've got general ledgers on different platforms, and finding something that can speak to both is what is providing the biggest challenge. And I think back to the question in terms of how can you best use this 1 year delay. I mean, for us, it's taking us from what was really an unrealistic timescale for a change of this scale into something that is much more realistic and enables us to put in place more dry runs and more testing. It would have been very rushed without the additional year.
Would you also assume, if we talk about the data, the finance architecture and so on, that's the infrastructure I've got to build on the one hand. On the other hand, if I need additional data, do I need the year also to collect this data, to collect the history, depending on my past data collection behavior? And is a year enough for this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the whole, it's very challenging getting to your opening position, and we've got a whole work stream dedicated to that, and that is all about the data. And so, it's certainly very helpful having one more year, but we are not slowing down anything at all because as a consequence of the 1 year delay.
I think we would be concerned if a firm were saying, "Oh, great, let's put down the tools for a year." Certainly, the feedback I've been getting has been that people are finding this challenging. I wouldn't necessarily say spend the year on this issue, but one of the issues that we think is a challenge is those rules that Joe was mentioning, is around. There are a lot of judgments, actuarial judgments. There's other judgments as well, but actuarial judgments, and actually having a framework within which one can recognise the judgment required and record that, and actually leaving behind a sort of audit trail that allows people to say, I can see where these key decisions came from. So I think that whole kind of judgment recording and judgment sort of capture layer is an important part of the data, making it more difficult.
Okay. So there's another question. I think it's a question of clarification. Who's the regulator, supervisor? Is it ESMA or is it IOPA? And would they cooperate? As far as I understand, ESMA is only responsible in the situation the company is active in on a listed market. IOPA is generally responsible for the insurance industry. For Great Britain, then there comes a special situation in the medium term. Who is responsible, or are they still for medium term responsible or not?
I suppose that, IOPA is responsible for the prudential side, and it's obviously absolutely not at all for IFRS.
No, not for IFRS. I think it was a follow-up question to the question: who is the regulator, and will the regulator give out any interpretations or implementation guidance on the standard?
Well, I mean, there is the financial reporting regulator in the UK is the FRC, and that would and ESMA has got an overarching role there. I think in terms of implementation guidance, it's only what is published in the standard, and TRG is meant to assist with interpretation. It doesn't actually publish any guidance, but the process of debating it and the papers and the questions and the responses is to help and try and get common understanding and common interpretation. But other than that, there won't be any further interpretation guidance.
We've got to come a little bit to the end. I've got one last question to all three of you. It's a hard estimate, but if you look into the future and like 2 years after implementation of IFRS 17, what's your expectation? Will the general perception be that the standard improved the reporting and accounting of insurance companies, or make it worse? Or John, what do you think?
I think it will make it in a more better way, hence why we've got this standard. I think what would happen as time goes, there'll be more investment required, because I think every company will have a different strategy and investment buckets, and within that they'll make some assumptions and try to be more pragmatic about it. Whereas some companies or some investors might have more investment to invest right now, immediately. So I think from my perspective, that's what would happen. It'll be still continuing in that sense. I'm hoping more from a data perspective, given that I do a lot of machine learning, and I think that's quite important.
Yeah, so 2 years in, accepting that it might hit different firms at different stages even after that. I think my hope is that we do just see that sort of convergence or joining of the dots, where we say there are different functions, elements within a business that are looking at the same data, the same questions, but from different perspectives, and that we'll see businesses that have been able to integrate that understanding of their data and answering these very complex questions, whether it's a prudential solvency standard or it's a reporting standard, and there'll probably be more of them over time, I suspect, as well. And I'd like to think that businesses are getting better at this, answering these difficult, complex questions, because they don't seem to be going away.
Okay.
My view is that I think they need to take a bit more time now and solve the issues that were identified by the field testing. I think I'm not convinced that 1 year is enough to fix everything that needs to be changed. So I think if they gave themselves 1 more year, because everybody is well and truly into implementation, if they give themselves 1 more year, I think there's a better chance to get something that really does improve insurance accounting. And I think it would be disappointing to just miss the opportunity to fix those issues now.
Okay, thank you very much to all three of you.
Thank you.